Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is David Carnes. I'm the Chairman and Chief Evangelist at OpFocus. On today's webinar in our SaaS RevOps series of webinars, we're going to talk about the role of a Salesforce Architect in scaling SaaS operations. I can't think of a more important topic. I feel like so many organizations are realizing the importance with the huge dollars that have been spent on the tech stacks and the level of complexity, and in particular because of all the things that we can do. We can pretty much build whatever on the platform, which doesn't mean we should build whatever on the platform, but this role of having somebody at this level with the visibility across this vast domain, this vast investment in tech stack is so incredibly valuable. So we've got a fantastic panel today. Before we get started, let's get this thing out of the way. There we go. We do have some more events coming up. So next week, I'll be hosting a dashboard dojo on reporting for sales leaders. So you're welcome to join us just at dashboarddojo.com. You can also find listings for the Dashboard Dojo on the OpFocus website and sign up there. I'll be speaking to a group, the Salesforce admin group in Dublin, Ireland on June 2nd. We'll have our next event in the RevOps webinar series on June 17th. On June 24th, I'll be speaking to a group in a Women in Tech group in Irvine, California. So looking forward to that. And then to a Charlotte Salesforce admin user group, June 25th. I haven't even posted the next two Dashboard Dojos for June. So we've got a lot going on as we head into the summer. I hope you can join us. So during the session today, your questions are absolutely welcome. We'd love to have you share thoughts, observations, or questions with us. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom webinar to submit that. We'll get to as many of them as we can during the session. We also have some time at the end to address additional questions. All right, so our topics today, we have introductions. So we have a fantastic panel. I'm so honored to have this group, a really great group of individuals. We'll talk about what is a Salesforce Architect. This is a many-faceted question, many-faceted answer about this really important role. There's so many ways that this is a very wide question and answer, and even with Salesforce continuing to add additional architect certifications, the list is growing. We'll talk about how does the role of an architect evolve as your organization grows. And we see this with a lot of our long-time relationships. We have relationships that have spanned many, many years. And with some of our clients, we've started when they have one person on the team who's a jack of all trades, and now years have gone by and they have 15 or 20 people on the team. And somewhere along the way, this role, the architect, becomes very important and a real key contributor to the governance and steering of the tech stack. We'll talk about what changes when an architect is brought on, and then we'll also discuss when is the right time to bring on an architect. So let's introduce our panel. And so we have Ezra Kenigsberg, who is the Salesforce Solution Architect at BigCommerce. And Ezra joined us for one of our webinars last year, and one of those little known secrets is Ezra and I went to high school together about 100 years ago, so that was great fun. We also have Boaz, who is at Rapid7. She is the Salesforce Solution Architect and the CRM platform owner there. We have Brian Wainwright, who's the Director of Digital Transformation at PTC. So thank you, Brian, for joining us again. And why don't we get started? I'm very interested to hear an introduction from each of you, and maybe your name, title, company, one sentence on your organization, some high-level tech stack details, you know, astrological sign, whatever you choose to throw in there. But perhaps, Brian, you could start us off.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks again for the opportunity to be part of this. These are great. I do look forward to them. So as David said, I'm a Director of Digital Transformation at PTC, but I think sort of the other role I play, really the real role I play, is the Chief Product Owner for PTC's internal Market to Bill product line, which encompasses lead to quote, quote to order, order to invoice capabilities across the organization. It's kind of the role is it's kind of the culmination of all the roles that so all the hats I've worn throughout my career. I've been an enterprise Java engineer, project manager. I've actually held a Salesforce Architect title at one point in my career. Not sure it meant then what it means today, but that's an interesting topic. And for the last 10 or so years, I've been leading global back office engineering teams, supporting business operations and business systems, including, of course, Salesforce, and across the public companies, private companies, for-profit, nonprofit, sort of a little bit of everything. Soon to go public companies, which I think is also important to. There's a lot to talk about there as well. But,
and now at a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company.
Exactly, yeah, and PTC's got a fairly robust Salesforce ecosystem, about 1,100 users, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, CPQ, communities for our partner operations. We just went live almost a month to the day with Salesforce Billing as an implementation. So, and so far so good with that. But we integrate RevPro, Oracle, order management, ERP. So a lot of big names in that tech stack.
Oh, that's great. And we're going to have you back in the fall to talk about billing at some point.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, great. Ezra, could you go next?
Sure thing. Hi, nice to meet you. Ezra Kenigsberg. I'm now the Chief Salesforce Architect at BigCommerce, based here in Austin, Texas. Our stack, we have both sales and service clouds. With BigCommerce, we have about 450 service licenses, about 150 sales licenses. We also support a community portal. We're running 20,000 community logins a month, something like that. Some other interesting license nerdery. We just flipped on restricted use licenses for our org. Yeah, in our most recent contract. So we're going to strive to make that work for us. We also have Salesforce Shield. Actually, it's interesting. We're on the unlimited edition, which amuses me in that it has limits. We also bought a license for 50 million big object records. And so might get the chance to talk a little bit about that. We're using it to support do not call capability to protect ourselves against GDPR, or to rather put ourselves in GDPR compliance. Key integrations we have in our org, we have integration to Zoro, we have an integration to Marketo, integration to ImPartner, which is what's giving me heartburn these days. We have a custom orchestration system, which is what we use to build stores for our customers. BigCommerce, we're in the storefront business. So if you want to sell things online, you come to us, not Shopify, and we get you hooked up. Not Amazon either. We also have a data solutions team. They integrate to us. They were using Redshift. They're moving to Snowflake. We deploy to our org using GitHub and GearSet. That's the hardcore nerdiness for y'all.
Well, great. So happy to have you with us again, Ezra. Amber, could you go next?
Sure. I don't have the cool backstory that Ezra does, or the quite the technical chops that Brian does, but my story is very similar. So we are, so I work for Rapid7, we're a cybersecurity software firm, publicly traded. We have Marketo, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, CPQ, Experience Cloud, I think it's called now. About 1,100 users. I don't know how many community / experience users there are, but quite a few. Also using GitHub. Just moved to Salesforce DX for our moving things around in and out, in and around the cloud. I was not heavily involved in that particular transition, but I hear it went lovely. So lots of moving parts, lots of spinning plates, lots of cats to herd.
Well, that's great. And you've been a Salesforce MVP. If I said forever, that would be too long, but 8-9 years now? 10 years. That's incredible. 10 years. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, really great. All right. So thank you. Thank each one of you for the introductions and sharing a bit about your current work environment and tech stacks. If we talk about the next, if we go to the next topic, okay, let's just address it square on. So what is a Salesforce architect? Ezra, could you start us out with that?
Marge, you're soaking in it. Well, you're looking at 3 right now. But what I would say is basically anybody who's working on the admin side of Salesforce ought to start thinking of themselves as a Salesforce architect. I would say if you want a snazzy acronym, let's go with STAN. Let's go with start thinking architecturally now. We talked about this a bit during one of the previous sessions. The idea that certainly when you reach a certain size, you'll want to have someone whose specific job is architectural. But even if you're a solo practitioner administrator of a Salesforce instance, you want to think architecturally. Brian had the most fantastic line for it. It was something like going from thinking about the what to thinking about the how or the why. I've forgotten the phrase he used. He'll remind us in a moment.
I don't remember either, probably.
Oh, it was a great line. But in any case, yeah, the significant point is that you're moving from an order taker. I mean, ideally, you shouldn't be an order taker as an administrator, but you need to move to that strategic way of thinking. You need to know what's broken in your current org. You need to know what makes stuff break from your store of experience as a Salesforce architect, and you need to be helping move the org, your Salesforce org, in a more productive direction. Couple points along these. So yeah, I encourage you not only to start thinking architecturally, even if you really are strictly an administrator, stop and step back from all the requests you're getting. We're always, neck deep in this stuff. Actually, neck would be lucky. But pulling back and thinking about the why and starting to learn from other people's painful experience is going to benefit you so much. Start thinking about why are we doing this, and are there ways we can avoid pain that you might have experienced in your past. When it comes to flavors of architect, it occurred to me that you're looking at about 3 big dimensions of architect that I could think of. You would go from an architect that's more hands-on, basically an administrator or somebody who might be slinging some code in part of their time, to someone who's more hands-off, who's strictly in the managing or overseeing lines of work. So that's one element of how an architect may be. Either typically in a smaller organization, they'll be hands-on, and as you get larger, they'll be pulling away, being more hands-off and meeting with the folks who are actually making changes to the org. So that's one dimension upon which an architect might sit, hands-on versus hands-off. Second, their role inside of Salesforce. You would typically start with one person whose job it is to be architecting. And as you get sufficiently big, you're going to have multiple people who are going to be responsible for architecting clouds or silos or particular areas of your instance of Salesforce. The one that we're implementing in BigCommerce right now that I'm very excited for is that I've been asked to play the role of the chief architect. And so my job is to, crash together the heads of the other guys who are very knowledgeable, and in numerous cases, more knowledgeable than me about their given clouds, and help make sure that there's sufficient communication so that even though they have specialties, they don't feel too siloed. So that's the second dimension. First was hands-on versus hands-off. Second is what your architect's picture is with regard to other architects. Do you have just one architecting person, or do you go so diverse as to have an entire hierarchy of architects? And then 3, what's your interactions outside of Salesforce? Are there architect-like roles with the systems in your organization beyond Salesforce? And so what are your interactions with those people? I've seen plenty of companies where Salesforce is really the big kahuna. It's what they spend most of their time and money on. And so the Salesforce architect needs to be helping implement discipline in other parts of the organization that don't have as sophisticated a systems picture yet. Or you can go to the far other extreme where they've got databases, they've got ERP, they've got all sorts of stuff going up and down. And Salesforce is actually in the job of trying to catch up and be as mature as those other systems. So I would say when it comes to the flavors of architect, you're dealing with those three distinct dimensions: hands-on versus hands-off, what kind of a role they play inside of Salesforce with regard to other architects, and what kind of a role they play outside of Salesforce in interacting with folks who own other systems, who may or may not be architects. Oh, sure.
Oh, I was just going to say that, I mean, thank you so much. That's really, did you want to add more?
The one other big one I was going to get to was the question of, okay, well, what distinguish fundamentally, what can an architect do that an admin can't? And what I'd say is that an architect has to have scars. It just, if you don't have the painful practical experience of having seen other instances of Salesforce, of having gone through the pain of implementing not as well as you could have, I would be really hard pressed to see that person as a genuine architect. An admin, I mean, certainly, you know, everyone benefits from experience, but I really do think that an architect must have experience if they're going to put that on their business card.
Regret and trauma is what you're saying.
Amber, would you like to take a crack at the same question?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said, Ezra. I think, you know, it's interesting. I'm coming at this role from a non-technical, well, a quasi-technical background. I'm an accidental admin. I was running a call center when I fell into the Salesforce universe. So I passed the platform developer 1 exam by the skin of my teeth. I'm not a coder. I don't want to be a coder. That's not where my heart lies. But designing systems and working on governance and making sure that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, those are all architecture things, kind of whether they're labeled that or not. You know, to your point about, you know, are you an admin or are you an architect, and where's that line? You know, it's scars. You know, I was a Salesforce consultant for 6 years. I've seen some stuff, y'all. I've done some stuff I'm not necessarily proud of, and if I could do it again, I would do it different. But yeah, I agree 110%.
And I like the way you phrased the stand, you know, the stand. One of the, I was coaching my son's soccer team, and the first day of practice, we you know, myself and the other coach, you know, asked everybody, who here plays defense? You know, and nobody raised their hand because nobody wants to play defense. There's no glory in playing defense. But the answer was everybody plays defense all of the time, right? And I like everybody's it doesn't matter where everybody's an architect, right? In some way, shape, or form, thinking about how to future-proof what they're building and what they're doing. And you know, it's not just providing that oversight and governance. It's really thinking differently about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
All right, so we have to address the question about certifications. And what's so interesting is, you know, Salesforce rolled out the certified technical architect. Then we were given the application architect and the solution systems architect. And now we have the B2C solution architect, B2C commerce architect, Heroku architecture designer. There's a brand new one that isn't fully public about the B2B solution architect. It's very exciting. And then Salesforce internally has something called an enterprise architect designation that employees can get. Is certification meaningful for folks down this path? Just throwing it out there, anyone who'd like to answer.
You know, when if I'm interviewing or if I'm interviewing for technical roles, you know, certifications are as valuable as maybe they are hard to get, I guess. You know, if it's easy to get and anybody can get it, then it's probably not that valuable. It doesn't matter. Salesforce Architect scenarios or badges are fairly hard to get. I think they're not easy, and so they have value there. They provide people with an understanding that, hey, I've got this base level of competence in what it is you're going to be asking me to do. But I think to what Ezra and Amber were saying earlier, that's only part of it. The experience, the scars, the trauma, the PTSD, all the stuff that sort of comes along with that. That's the experience is always more important as far as I'm concerned. But it does matter. It matters. I think Salesforce certifications matter.
As a hiring manager, it's a door opener, but it's not a given. Right? Do I filter by that? Probably, even subconsciously, but it's not, it's not a given. If you come in and you can't tell me the difference between a, master detail and a lookup relationship, we're done here. So it's about, being able to articulate that experience.
Sure. How about for you, Ezra?
Yeah, I've become something of a certification skeptic myself. I generally say there are two certifications I care about. One is the administrator cert, and then the other is the certified technical architect. Because that certified technical architect, that's work, kids. Is it still $6,000 to get? Is it still standing in front of a murder board for 3 hours?
Yes, and yes.
Yeah, so
yeah, it's a big deal. I'm glad. I'm really glad. So for us as a consulting shop, certs are important, and this demonstrates a level of expertise and a depth. I'm thinking of things like the Experience Cloud cert or some of these others that you need to know a fair amount in order to go achieve that. I'm glad that Salesforce has mixed it up and provided this path, not only for folks to have next career steps, but then also to have areas of specialization, and just to acknowledge that not everyone's going to be a CTA, not everyone's going to write code, but there is a real role for folks as architects in these very specific areas. Maybe we could shift to the next question around how the role of an architect evolves as the company grows. Amber,
can I throw in just a quick? We saw in the chat here, Nitin Kundeshwar, excuse me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, brought in a pain point that many folks feel about folks not wanting to document. Maybe we want to put a pin in that, but it's something I can give you 12 hours of tirade on if you like. Okay, to talk about an hour, should we cover our topics?
Yeah, well, why don't we'll save that. Let's absolutely make that a priority for the Q&A time slot. So with regard to the role of an architect evolving as the company grows, Amber, you've seen it firsthand with Rapid7's rapid growth.
Yeah. It really depends on the organization, depends on the culture of the organization. But in general, what happens, and again, I'm generalizing, is you have an administrator or maybe two or three who maybe are part of the help desk, right? They are fundamentally order takers. We need a checkbox. Okay, I build you a checkbox, right? They work at a ticketing system. Then the organization goes, okay, we have this amazing system. We need to be doing more and better with it. Let's start to think about what that more and better looks like. And hopefully, what I usually see happen is they bring in a partner who can help identify those ways that the platform can be better leveraged. Usually the partner goes, hey, you have internal resources over here who know where the bodies are buried. Let's bring them into the conversation. And then that person or those people are elevated in that kind of architecture role. I've seen that happen over and over again. And sometimes those folks don't want that architecture role and they move on, but oftentimes they want to rise to the occasion and be a part of this new way of doing things at their organization. There's not a right way to do it. I don't want to give folks the impression that that if you don't do it the way that we talk about in this webinar, you're doing it wrong. It depends on your organization. It depends on how your company is evolving. It depends on how quickly you're moving. It depends on, the face of the moon, it depends on all of the things. So thinking about, what it is that you, as I'm assuming the people making this decision, the management in this organization are thinking about what it is that they need from someone with this level of expertise. Do you need someone to think about, the usage of the platform 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now, or do you need that checkbox and that report? It's okay to need both, but getting both from the same person is not setting that person up for success. So thinking about how you want to expand headcount and expand the purview of that team is pretty important.
Brian, any comments on that? And you've seen multiple organizations. In fact, during your time at Toast, the scale was incredible.
Yeah, Toast continues to be nuts based on the people I'm still in touch with there. And it does depend. Toast is a great example. It's a company that does intend to go public, I believe, at some point. So really, as the ecosystem of the company grows, takes on new capabilities, wants to do new things, and then obviously going from a private company to a public company, you have a whole new set of problems that you need to deal with in terms of SOX compliance, audit, regulatory audit issues, a lot of things that an architect maybe in a private company wouldn't necessarily be thinking of, but now has to think about, oh geez, how do I set up this security model that that is going to make sure we have segregation of duties between the order management system and the billing system, or the quoting system and the order management. There's a lot that has to go into that, and that requires a lot of maturity from an SDLC perspective. It's I don't want to sound like a cop out when we say that it depends. It does depend, and it depends on how the company's growing and in which areas the company is growing and trying to add new capabilities, whether it's in a marketing sense or in a quoting or billing and invoice customer success point of view. I think fundamentally, if we stick to the everybody plays defense stand, right? If even as a startup, you have somebody who's thinking longer term and is thinking about not just being, as Ezra said, not just being that ticket taker, but has a long-term vision that jives with the business, then you're going to future-proof yourself a lot better.
Ezra, you've seen, and you were an architect at Dell, so that's on complete other, just massive scale. But your time at BigCommerce, you've seen the role evolve, and now a team of 3, and your role as chief architect. Tell us about that evolution in your experience.
It's interesting. There's been a very conscious break with basically we kind of evolved a new layer of hierarchy. BigCommerce is growing pretty aggressively. And so we said, it's time to move from managing the expectations of our stakeholders that we can, take orders, and instead say, this is going to be a productive back and forth. We're going to share more of our backlog with our stakeholders and be interacting with them. And it's very interesting because the manager of our practice has asked me to actually narrow somewhat what I do, in the sense that previously I used to be doing the soup to nuts interaction with the stakeholder, be doing a bit of BA analysis and requirements gathering. And we're now finding more specific people to fit into these slots. And so interestingly, even though I've been asked to fulfill what a snazzier sounding title, it's somewhat narrower. They want me to be aware of what the stakeholders need and aware of what the BAs are telling me, but that's no longer my gig. So we are deepening our organization so that we can get more specialists. I'm real excited for it. Those 3 dimensions I mentioned before, that idea of being hands-on to hands-off, being a solo practitioner inside Salesforce, and being interacting with architects outside of Salesforce. I see all of those dials getting turned for me, so that I'm going to, I have a long and glorious history of nerding out on data, and I have to kind of put that in the box and be more of a grown-up now. So I'm very excited for it. And I think you come back and ask me in a year, but I think this is a good model for how to shift from startup mentality to mature company mentality. You tell me, Dave, does it jive with your impression of how companies you've consulted have sort of made that step up
You know, it's been so interesting to watch organizations who might have one person with some Salesforce skills when we were first introduced, and we take on design responsibility, and we'll take on making strategic recommendations based on the goals that we hear about, or the strategies, the go-to-market strategies will help with that. And then as an organization grows, there's some point where the trigger is pulled to hire that first architect, and we'll often be involved. And then there might be another phase where, again, like you're saying, it becomes more specific, specialized, where we might do architecture work within CPQ or within a community or another particular, whether it's integrations. But I do feel like there are phases. I think this leads to really nicely to the next question of what changes when an architect is brought on. And maybe we could have Brian start off with that question.
Yeah, I'll say, can I say it depends again? Can we say that again? I mean, because maybe everything changes, maybe nothing changes at all. You know, I guess the reason why I'm hedging is, you know, sort of, you know, everybody's going to be, every company's going to be a little bit different in terms of where it is in the maturity of its ecosystem and its sort of life, so to speak. But, you know, I think fundamentally, you know, one thing that we've been touching on, or we've been sort of circling around, is that there's a part that the architect plays in the overall strategic vision of the organization, right? And it's I can't stress the importance of those architects designing not just for what business units want today, right? What they want to deploy today, but where the organization wants to go into the future. So it's important that the company grows. The technical architects have that visibility into what that strategic business roadmap looks like, so they can begin to lay out a technical vision for the ecosystem that is going to support that, right? It's, you know, you build technical debt into these systems, and then unwinding that, unraveling that technical debt, particularly if you've started out as, you know, I think Amber was saying it, you know, one admin who's a ticket taker building stuff out just on demand, right? Without that thought to, you know, what this is going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now. You know, you're building technical debt that's going to need to get addressed at some point or another, right? So, you know, that collaboration probably represents a paradigm shift for a lot of companies that are used to simply dictating requirements to technical teams to execute against, right? You know, architects should not be ticket takers. They should be, you know, visionaries collaborating with stakeholders on how the ecosystem should evolve to support the business direction, right? You know, there's, for implementation teams, it's, you know, it's going to seem that there's going to be a lot of oversight, not to what they're doing, but also how they're doing it. And fundamentally, like, you know, in an agile sense, velocity may slow down, right? As you sort of add a little bit more governance around what you're doing, making sure that the solutions are more fully vetted, they're more cross-functionally coordinated across the enterprise, you know, identifying dependencies, technical risks, you know, technical KPIs against performance, data and data integrity, things like that, you know. But I tell the businesses, I tell my kids that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And, you know, it's an architect's responsibility to ensure that the ecosystem is running smoothly, that things are done correctly the first time, without any surprises, right? And there's never enough time, you know, there's never enough time to do it right. There's always time to do it over. You know, I think it's an architect's responsibility to make sure it gets done right the first time. And that cross-functional planning and awareness of the overall solution context from a feature or initiative is going to ultimately improve quality, reduce risk, and you know, help the business get to where it wants to go sooner rather than later, right?
I definitely agree, and it's something we have to counsel clients on, that bringing on an architect will there's a level of overhead that's a necessary level to support the growth of the business that they have to expect with the rigor and governance that's introduced. Amber, do you have thoughts on what changes when an architect's brought on?
Yeah, to Brian's point, it depends. often the rigor that is brought by bringing an architect in, because again, you're necessarily bringing in someone with some PTSD, some trauma, some battle scars, and so a good architect can communicate to even a junior team why these things are important without that team having to go through that trauma. And so what can change is the dynamic amongst the team members and their stakeholders, right? If you've got folks who are used to order taking and all of a sudden they're empowered to push back, that's a change in dynamic for everybody. And it can be tricky because people, right? Stakeholders want what they want when they want it. They don't care about your governance and your overhead. And so explaining the business value of that and how it supports the broader outcomes of the organization is something that an architect can really add value to that conversation. We've touched very briefly a little bit on Agile and how that oftentimes when an architect comes in, they bring in some flavor of Scraggle fall, I've heard it called, trying to move to a very iterative approach, because again, to Brian's point, as you put something in place, it's tech debt. And so be able to iterate on a solution over and over again, knowing you're going to come back to that portion of the code base, knowing you're going to come back to that solution, means that you are able to pivot faster, means that you are able to adjust more quickly, and that is valuable to business stakeholders. So being able to articulate all that and sell them on that speed and agility is super important. So what changes? Everything and nothing.
That almost seems Zen-like. Ezra.
Yeah. It's going from what you're doing to the how and the why. You're evolving beyond this 3 inches in front of your face thing. Let me be very clear. I am not advocating doing mediocre work, but it is fully possible to communicate well, do mediocre work, and be thought of as a genius. It is equally possible to do fantastic work, communicate badly, and be thought of as a flippin' idiot. So no small share of what an architect does is communicating, managing those expectations, and helping, as the zinger of Brian's I was trying to remember before, that there's never enough time to do it right. I think that encapsulates it beautifully. The architect is the one who helps an organization start doing stuff right.
So I wonder if, leading into our last question, when is the right time to bring on an architect? Just share a little bit of right now. For OpFocus, when we're introduced in, there's almost always some foundational stuff that has to be cleaned up. It's almost like repointing of a chimney or something, where we just try to make sure that there's a good solid foundation. But we're very, very interested in establishing the roadmap. And do you guys think that is the architect the owner of the roadmap? For, we will typically, when we do a roadmap project, we'll be looking out 12 to 18 months. And, further than that's almost too far, too many variables. But that 12 to 18 months, and just, sort of big rock placements and planning, is that something that you see the architects owning?
For me personally,
Go ahead, Ezra.
In my organization, I think it's going to be, I propose it, and then I'm going to have leadership yaying and naying various parts of it. I could just as easily see an architect being the sole owner of it.
I think in our organization, it's a matter of proposing those, collaborating on creating those big rocks, and then working with the business for them to prioritize it. So it's not so much, it's co-ownership, I guess is the best way to put that. There isn't a single human who is in charge of the broad backlog. We're all in charge of it together, and to the extent that consensus is possible, we aim for that.
Yeah, at PTC is a little bit different than any other organization that I've worked for because as the chief product owner, right, internal product team, I own the roadmap, right? So I own the roadmap for those various product line spaces. But there's a collaboration there that happens with the business as well as with the technical team to ensure that their technical team doesn't have its own roadmap and the business doesn't have its own roadmap, and then I have my roadmap. It's a single, really endeavoring to put together a single strategic roadmap that looks out quarter by quarter, maybe half by half, depending, but at least quarter by quarter, we're really evaluating priorities. And then, this is strategic initiatives. These are the system work that needs to be done in order to support those strategic initiatives. These are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And then from a technical perspective, here's the overall solution, the solution context, in a scaled agile sense, the solution context to these features that we're intending to deploy, iteratively over that period of time. So it's everybody working, together to get to that single shared vision. From a technical debt perspective, our internal teams really they allocate percentage of their velocity towards those strategic initiatives, and then what we call team context work, things that don't come in at an enterprise level, but it's more sort of piecemeal requests dedicated to a single specific business unit or area, and then 10% technical debt. Every iteration, we got to continue. We make sure that we're improving performance, and we have enough fields against our account object left over. So things like that. That if you don't keep an eye on, they're going to come back to haunt you, and then you're going to be dead in the water at some point in the future.
Such an important thing. And of course, I just thought of the black tab that we don't seem to talk about anymore when, you need to make a call and get some more fields on the account object. But
I just read in the release notes, they're increasing it to 900 fields per object. And that makes me sad.
And that's enterprise or that's unlimited?
I don't remember, but that either way, because
it would be an increase on either one, but yeah, so that just feels like that's allowing more bad behavior
to
sort of persist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. The real reason behind that is not to go build great new things. But so this last question, when is the right time to bring on an architect? We have people on the call that have 50 Salesforce users using Sales Cloud. We have people on the call with 100 Salesforce users, Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. We have people with 200 users, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, CPQ. We have folks on the call with 1,000 Salesforce users. And this sort of magic question, Ezra, you were kind of pointing earlier and mouthing the word now for when to bring on an architect. There is a lot of question around, do I need a Salesforce architect? Salesforce tells me I don't even really need many admins. So why should I go buy, my sales rep tells me I don't need many admins. So when do you think the right time would be? And a challenging question, Amber, why don't we start with you? When might be the right time, thinking that a lot of the folks on the call are at a different place, and as they grow and scale, when might be that right time to pull the trigger?
Yeah, I think it depends. The right time is when your organization is aware that the current pattern isn't working or doesn't scale, and you need to be thinking bigger picture and longer term. That's when you bring in an architect to do that bigger picture, longer term thinking. Do you want them to also be a people manager? Maybe, maybe not. But it's important to set that person up for success as you bring them in. Here's what we want you to focus on, and having it be also order taking isn't setting them up for success. So thinking about what it is that from the leadership, whoever the executive sponsor of Salesforce is, and you have one, don't you? If you don't, you need that first, then get an architect. But that forethought is there from a technical perspective. So yeah, it depends.
Okay, Ezra?
I'm big on the dial concept. So, if you feel like you should strive to think architecturally, full stop. If you find that you're accruing cruft, if you find that you're having trouble documenting, if you find that you're fixing as opposed to doing stuff right the first time, then you need to be turning that knob more in the architectural direction. It need not be a switch flip of, we are hiring a person whose explicit job is architect, but that certainly on the smaller end of the scale, it's just asking folks to be more architecturally minded. As you get larger, that's when you're going to flip and say, okay, let's get a person whose specific job description is architect.
Sure. Brian?
Yeah, I agree that there's a role to be played regardless, right? And maybe some companies have more money to hire somebody with that certification or that title, but I think if it's a role and we're looking to somebody like I was saying earlier, somebody who's going to collaborate with the business on what the future strategic vision is and how the technical ecosystem is going to support that do that today, right? Like, don't wait until a year from now and then realize that all the stuff that you did before needs to be unraveled before you can actually build on that, like you were saying, David, right? Build on that solid foundation that's going to enable you to scale. If it requires some level of expertise that you don't have on your team right now, then okay, then have those conversations about what you can, who you can hire and how you can hire them. But I think there's no time like now to future-proof your system and your ecosystem. So you want to be responsive to change. You can't be responsive to change, especially in this environment, the SaaS environment. Businesses can't respond quickly to those market forces if they first got to re-engineer everything in order to make it fit.
It's like a big boat anchor being dragged.
It just drags you down.
Yep. We've even contemplating going so far as requiring some form of a roadmap with every new relationship, because a lot of the organizations that will be introduced into, might have taken a significant round of funding. They're expected to double in the next 12 months or 18 months. And, there is that pile of tech debt. There's some movement toward investing in a new set of tools, but we really want that clarity in line with the the goals of the business, the strategy of the business, and just making sure that we're aligning this tech stack, the systems, data, process, reporting strategy. So we end up playing that role if there isn't that role internally, and we certainly appreciate the role so much when we work with them. We've got a couple more things. We'll get to questions. So we mentioned the upcoming events just before. So here they are again, and all of these are listed, or many of them are listed on our on the OpFocus website. We do have a number of open positions on the OpFocus team that we're hiring for. We're always, we feel very blessed for the amount of work that we have and just the talent that's on the team. We're looking for a senior growth advisor for our growth advisory practice, or SaaS growth advisory practice, senior engagement manager, a senior CPQ consultant, among other roles as we continue to grow. We do have some questions. Ezra, maybe we can get back to, was it Nitin's question about documentation? And instead of all afternoon, I think or 12 hours, let's figure out a shorter, what's on your mind, Ezra, with documentation?
Sure. Also very funny, I saw Ed Schlesinger of Elements.cloud was eager to jump in. So
yeah, good.
Yeah, if you're excited for partners to tout their solutions, you can certainly turn it to Ed as well. My experience has been that, boy, documentation is tough. And what I've found that I've enjoyed most is the setup we've created at BigCommerce, which is that we're not asking hardworking admins, hardworking devs, not even that much of the architects to be building documentation. Instead, what they're doing is they're linking to the tickets that caused things to get built. And so that way, anybody can look at a particular field or a bit of workflow or code, go back to the ticket, and they can read up on it. If there's a need for a hard piece of documentation, folks can go and build it in a way that, they share broadly. But it's just awful difficult to say to people who, are either billing out or costing the company money, hey, I want you to stop and build documentation that others may or may not use. Instead, my subjective experience, and again, the folks who build these tools will say, well, you're under documenting. But what I found is generally being able to go back and look at the original request, look at the conversation that went around the delivery of a feature, serves at least as a good first step. If folks find this is the thing we keep coming back to, that's the point at which I'm going to make hard documentation.
Well, so let me push back a little bit, because I think that's great technical documentation for the developers, right? Your end users need documentation on how to use the damn thing you built, right? And that's a different type of documentation that needs screenshots and first click here and then click there. And that's very dependent on the tech savviness of your least tech savvy user, right? You want to write for them. And maybe make it in a PDF so that it's PDFable and printoutable. I've worked with organizations where the folks who were going to be entering the data literally printed my instructions and had it next to them while they typed on their, Windows 95. I'm dating myself. But so there's different flavors of documentation, and if you lump them all together, that's dangerous. The kind you're talking about is the developer kind, and we need that. The end user kind is different, and we need that. And then I think there's also the higher level documentation that is, this feature that's represented in these 10 tickets supports this corporate initiative that was outlined in the corporate kickoff, all hands, whatever, 6 months ago, that is our North Star. And this is why we're headed there. So it's really kind of 3 levels of the thing. Yeah, we can talk documentation all day. You're muted, David.
A brief follow-up question for you, Amber.
Yeah.
Do you have folks at Rapid7 who can build the end user documentation, or does that fall on the folks who are working Salesforce?
It's usually a train the trainer type situation. So the stakeholders are involved with the dev team on the UX and do the UAT, and then they do the documentation. We have a sales enablement team who does that piece. So they are, the humans who are building it are part of the development team, but not as coders, not as folks who are doing the hands-on keys, but they are part of the Scrum, they are part of the refinement, they are part of the process. Does that help?
Oh, that's great. So many ways to organize our teams and take advantage of folks in different departments. And thank you to Amber and Ezra for answering so many of the questions in the Q&A. I do want to surface one of them to the broader group, and maybe we could even ask Brian to chime in on this one. Could you talk about how you, as an architect, deal with longer term design trade-offs versus the business's need to have something now? How you handle the time versus what you get in the short term when it comes to dealing with business users. So this age-old trade-off.
Yeah, I think it's you don't always have to deliver the Lamborghini right out of the gate, right? It's it's minimal viable product, minimal lovable product. What is the thing that's going to accomplish the outcome? Right? The outcome doesn't necessarily have to come all at once either. It can be done and delivered iteratively. For maybe you start with a skateboard, and then you got a bike, and then the bike turns into a car, and then the car turns into the Lamborghini, right? But thinking in terms of agile and ultimately, right? It's from the perspective of a product owner. I'm in the business of providing value to the business, right? Through the work that we're speccing. So how are you going to deliver the most value fastest, right? You're not going to, if you got to save up, $800,000, to get the Lamborghini, you're not going to realize the value of the Lamborghini until, well, never. But, for a very long time. Whereas if you sort of think in terms of incrementally delivering that value, right? This is the thing that the business needs the most. This is what we should focus on. The next iteration is this, the next iteration is that, and you grow, and that's going to mitigate your risk. So as you sort of start to understand maybe what those technical trade-offs are within the ecosystem, maybe your ecosystem is changing as you speak, and you need to deliver something that's going to require an integration to something you know you're going to toss away like 6 months from now or 8 months from now, based on that roadmap. How do you sort of mitigate that? And you need to have those conversations with your business stakeholders. The architect needs to be part of those conversations. So they're not, like we said earlier, they're not just somebody who's being responsive to the immediate business needs. They have to have that long-term vision and understand what that is.
Well, that's great. I think we might have time for one more question. I noticed one other one in the list. Where does the architect fit in the business systems team? So that, I think, for a lot of organizations pondering their first hire, is it somebody, sort of like the person who has the most knowledge? They might then become the manager with a team of people, but in their heart of hearts, they may actually just wish to own the design and own the system. But in thinking of it as, maybe if you are able to get funds to hire somebody and bring them on, sort of where do they fit? Any thoughts on that?
I'll say one thing, which is I think it's very important to ensure that there are no conflicts of interest, right? We want architects to be able to operate independently and think creatively and independently without pressures from somebody else telling them to just do it this way, right? Like if they're going to be responsible for the ecosystem, then there needs to be some segregation, right? And to mitigate any conflicts of interest of them being feeling like they're forced to do something that maybe they don't think is the right thing to do.
So interesting. Amber or Ezra?
So I'm an individual contributor, and that's best for everybody. Where I fit in the team, I am peers with the product owners. I am peers with our ERP platform owner. And we work together as a team to talk about where we need to, how do we get to 2 years from now while meeting business outcomes with minimal scars and stress and PTSD, but that will happen as well, because that's the nature of the beast here. So, but that may not be right for every organization, but that's right for us.
What I found personally is I strive as an architect to be as close to the stakeholders as folks will let me get, because I find it really helps lower the temperature of, we asked for this and we're not getting it until 3 months from now. How dare you? When I can demonstrate to them, I know stuff, I do stuff well, I'm working hard on things that you said are higher priorities. That helps turn it from a one-way tirade into a conversation. Always ask questions. When someone says, we needed this thing, productively, gently ask back at them. Well, my understanding was that this thing was more important. Should I reprioritize and make this other thing the most important thing and set this to the side for the time being? That kind of conversation, and especially one that's driven by a question, really helps transform a do this into a let's talk and figure out what's the best thing we can do for ourselves now.
Well,
I think roadmaps can help with that, right? A roadmap represents a shared vision. And I think if everybody's on the same page about what that roadmap is, there shouldn't be any surprises about things. Obviously, you want to be agile. Things can change, priorities can change. But if you've got a roadmap and everybody agrees to it, you mitigate that.
Amber, Ezra, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can twist your arms and have you come join us again later in the year. But it's really been a pleasure speaking with you today on the role of the Salesforce Architect in scaling SaaS ARR. Kyle, thanks for hosting us again. And we look forward to having everyone join us again sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
Thanks,
Really
everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.